Edward L. Rowny, a lieutenant general who advised presidents of both parties during arms control negotiations with the Soviet Union, repeatedly raising warnings about the Russians and arguing that American proposals were too soft, died on December 17 in Washington. He was 100. His son Michael said the cause was cardiomyopathy, a heart disease. After serving in World War II, the Korean War and Vietnam, General Rowny was named a negotiator in the talks that resulted in the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty signed in 1972 by President Richard M. Nixon and the Soviet leader Leonid I. Brezhnev. He was also a principal player in the next round of SALT negotiations. But when that agreement was put forward in 1979, he objected to it so strongly that he resigned from the army after President Jimmy Carter signed it so that he could be free to speak against it. Which he did. The emerging treaty, General Rowny said in typically uncompromising language, is not in our interest since it is inequitable, unverifiable, undermines deterrence, contributes to instability and could adversely affect NATO security and Allied coherence. The second SALT was never ratified by the United States Senate, partly because later in 1979 the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. General Rowny may not have liked what President Carter came up with, but time would show that he was an equal opportunity disdainer. In 1987, this time as an advisor to a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, on the first Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, known as START, he wrote in a newspaper opinion article that negotiations over nuclear missiles should also include the issue of the Soviets' superiority in conventional forces. The article drew a carefully worded but unmistakable rebuke from the White House. I think it is fair to say that there are people who are somewhat upset about it and would rather he didn't make those comments, Reagan's spokesman, Marlin Fitzwater, said. Edward Leon Rowny was born on April 3, 1917, in Baltimore. His father, Gratian, an immigrant from Poland, was a carpenter and contractor. His mother, the former Mary Radziszewski, was in poor health for much of his childhood, and he was raised largely by a grandmother. After receiving a degree in civil engineering from Johns Hopkins University in 1937, he entered West Point. He took a particular liking there to the study of world history and was a member of the debating team, two interests that would serve him well later. By the time he graduated in 1941 as a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers, World War II was underway in Europe, and soon the United States was drawn in. His war service included assignments in Africa and Italy. After the war he worked in strategic planning, examining, among other things, what the post-war army should look like. He also found time to attend Yale, receiving master's degrees in 1949 in international relations and civil engineering. He was then assigned to the Far East as a planning officer. When the Korean War came, he helped plan the Incheon landing in 1950 and then played a number of other roles in that conflict, including commanding an infantry regiment. He was promoted to brigadier general in 1961.